I've been looking at something I think is pretty fascinating, the relationship between artists and record labels.
Yeah.
And the piece we have is called Atlantic Records, Artist Disputes and Industry Alternatives. And this is juicy stuff.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking Lil Uzi Vert, Kanye, Meek Mill, Nicki Minaj. They've all had these very public clashes with Atlantic Records, which kind of makes you wonder, is Atlantic falling apart?
Yeah, it really makes you wonder if there's like a bigger story here, because it's not just like isolated incidents. It seems like there's kind of a pattern here of artists feeling stifled and pushing back against how the industry works.
Yeah, against that power structure you're talking about.
Yeah, okay.
And to really understand what's going on, I think we need to take a step back and look at Atlantic's history for a second. Founded all the way back in 1947, they've been a powerhouse in the music industry for decades. I mean, working with legends like Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin, Led Zeppelin. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Yeah, it's really incredible to see how they've evolved through different genres too, from jazz and soul to rock and pop and hip hop. But I think what's really important to understand here is how the industry itself has changed. Atlantic is now part of Warner Music Group.
Right, one of the big three.
Exactly, one of the big three. And they basically control, pretty much the entire industry, alongside Sony and Universal.
That's a lot of power concentrated in just a few companies. And it really, I think, highlights that power dynamic that we were talking about. When you start to look at some of these artist disputes, like with Lil Uzi Vert, for example, here's this incredibly talented artist who's been very open about his frustrations with Atlantic and its subsidiary Generation now, talking about delayed releases, creative restrictions. He even announced his retirement at one point.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Remember that Free Uzi track?
Yeah.
Got pulled from streaming platforms because of licensing issues. It's a really clear example of how label control can just completely derail an artist's career.
Absolutely. And I think it makes you think about the pressure that puts on artists. You're pouring your heart and soul into your music, but then you have these external forces dictating what you can release and when, and how you release it, especially for someone like Lil Uzi Vert, who's all about pushing boundaries. It's got to be so frustrating.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And it's not just creative control either. It's also about the financial side of things. And I think Kanye West's dispute over the Vultures albums with Ty Dolla $ign really highlights this.
Yeah.
There was this huge disagreement over revenue sharing. Atlantic wanted a big cut, and Kanye was not happy about it. It got very public, very messy on social media.
Yeah. And what's interesting there is that collaborative projects like that add a whole other layer of complexity, because you've got Ty Dolla $ign, who already has his own deal with Atlantic, which potentially gives them more leverage over the profits from that joint project. It really raises the question of who ultimately controls the money in these situations and how much say the artists really have.
It's a great question. And it's something that Meek Mill has also been very vocal about. He's accused Atlantic of basically prioritizing other artists over him, essentially shelving his album and hurting his earnings in the process.
Oof, that's going to be tough, especially with a label as big as Atlantic.
Yeah, I mean, talk about adding insult to injury, right?
It's almost like this popularity contest, but with incredibly high stakes. Because if you think about it from the label's perspective, it's all about market share. They're going to shift their resources to whoever they think is going to generate the most profit. And for someone like Meek Mill, feeling like your label doesn't have your back, that can be devastating.
Absolutely. I mean, that's got to be heartbreaking almost. Like, what am I doing all this for?
Exactly.
If the people who are supposed to be supporting me are not even putting my music out there, makes you wonder if there's any loyalty in this industry.
Yeah.
Or if it's all just about, the money. And then there's the Nicki Minaj situation, which I'll admit is kind of getting into conspiracy theory territory. But the idea is that Atlantic might have intentionally promoted Cardi B to compete with Nikki.
Oh, wow.
Some people even say that they were encouraging other artists to diss her. Like it was all orchestrated by the label.
That's a wild theory. But it is interesting to think about.
Right.
But I think it's important to remember that we need evidence to back up these claims. Theories are fun, but without concrete proof, it's just speculation.
Oh, for sure, for sure. But speaking of controversy, we also have Gucci Mane accusing Atlantic of being polite racist.
Yeah, that's a serious accusation.
Very serious.
And something that definitely needs to be investigated thoroughly. And, just to be clear, we're simply reporting what's stated in the source material. We're not saying that this is definitely true or false, just that these accusations have been made.
Right, exactly. We're not taking sides here, just trying to give you the full picture.
Right.
So with all this drama surrounding Atlantic, it's natural to wonder if there are any alternatives. And that's where this SoundRig.io platform comes in.
Right, SoundRig.io.
They're presented as a potential solution to some of these problems we've been talking about.
Yeah, what's interesting about them is that they seem to be flipping the script. They claim to give artists a much larger share of the revenue and more control over their music. It's like a direct challenge to the traditional label model.
It's like they're saying, hey, artists, come to us, bypass the big labels, and keep more of your hard-earned money.
Exactly.
Which, after hearing about the frustrations that artists like Lil Uzi Vert and Meek Mill have faced, sounds pretty appealing.
It really does. Makes you wonder if these artist-centric platforms are the future of the music industry. Like, could this be the start of a real shift in power?
It's a good question. But let's take a step back for a second. Is Atlantic Records really falling apart? I mean, our source doesn't seem to think so.
Yeah, I mean, despite all the controversy, Atlantic is still a major player in the industry. They've adapted to the streaming era, and they continue to release hit after hit. I don't think they're going anywhere anytime soon.
So maybe it's more like Trouble in Paradise than a complete meltdown.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Atlantic's success, especially in the streaming world, suggests that they're weathering the storm, so to speak. Maybe these artist disputes are more a sign of growing pains within the industry as a whole, rather than Atlantic specifically falling apart.
That's a good point. It brings us back to the bigger picture. This isn't just about one label. It's about the changing dynamics of the music industry. Artists demanding more control, fairer compensation, and exploring alternative paths to success.
Absolutely. It's a reflection of how the artist-label relationship is evolving in a rapidly changing musical landscape.
And what we're seeing with Atlantic and these high-profile artists is just one piece of that puzzle.
Yeah.
You know, for me, this is where it gets really interesting. We started off talking about some pretty juicy industry gossip, but now we're talking about like the power dynamics that shape the entire music industry. And it really makes you think about how much things have changed, even in just the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a dynamic industry, constantly evolving. I mean, you have streaming, social media, all these independent platforms popping up. They've totally disrupted the traditional model. And it's fascinating to see how both artists and labels are adapting to this new landscape.
It's like watching this high-stakes game unfold in real time.
Well, I think that's the beauty of exploration, isn't it? It sparks curiosity and opens up new avenues for inquiry.
For sure. And I hope you, the listener, are feeling that same sense of curiosity. So, as we wrap things up, let me leave you with this. What do you think about the future of the music industry? Are these artist-centric platforms like SoundRig.io the key to a fairer, more balanced system? Or will the major labels always find a way to hold on to their power?
It's a question worth thinking about. I mean, the music industry is a reflection of our culture, our values, and the power of creative expression. So how it evolves will have an impact on all of us, not just the artists, but everyone who loves music.
So true. Keep your ears open, your minds engaged, and keep exploring those deeper questions. Until next time.